Welcome back to Monitors Unboxed. Today we're checking out Acer's 1440p 240Hz OLED gaming monitor, the Predator X27U. No silly name here, pretty easy to remember, and that's exactly what you want to see from a high-end product. The X27U is very similar to the other 27-inch OLED gaming displays that I've been reviewing recently. The LG 27GR95QE, Asus PG27AQDM, and Corsair 27QHD240. All four of these monitors use the same LGW OLED panel, so the fundamental basic performance characteristics should be identical whether we look at the Acer variant or others. However, across our testing so far, we have seen some interesting differences between each model, such as overall panel brightness and feature support, which is why I'm back again to see whether the Acer model is worth your hard-earned cash. If you've seen our reviews of the other models, the design of the Acer X27U should be quite familiar. All look very similar from the front, at least for the display section. It's a decent sized OLED screen with relatively thin bezels. Then from the rear, all brands are using a variation of the central box design with the thin OLED panel extending out from there. Acer's central box is made from standard black plastic with a few different texture highlights. It looks decent and there's no RGB LED lighting. The main difference aesthetically is the stand, which is a tale of two halves. The legs look great and appear to be made of a sturdy metal with a smooth finish. The pillar isn't nearly as well built though, it's just basic black plastic, and while you can't really see it from the front, I would have liked something a bit more premium in finish when buying a high-end monitor. With that said, the stand does offer height, tilt, swivel, and pivot support, so you get a great range of ergonomic control, and there's plenty of height on offer here that should suit most desk setups. For inputs, we have one DisplayPort 1.4 with DSC, two HDMI 2.0 ports, and a USB Type-C input which supports DP Alt mode and generous 90 watts of power delivery, great for charging laptops. A bit disappointing to see just HDMI 2.0 used here though, which are limited to just 144Hz. At this point, they really should be HDMI 2.1 to allow for the full 240Hz over HDMI. There's also a built-in KVM switch, which can be used with the included USB ports, both Type-C and the 2-port Type-A hub. The OSD is controlled through a directional toggle along the bottom edge, and inside you'll find a decent range of features mostly centered around gaming. There's a crosshair, FPS readout, timer, sniper mode, black boosting, and a low blue light mode, plus a range of other color controls and settings. Some of these features like crosshairs I wouldn't recommend using on an OLED monitor due to the risk of burn-in, but they are included for occasional use. Like the other three variants of this OLED monitor that I've tested so far, the Acer model uses a matte anti-glare coating. As I said in my review of the LG model, the first variant I looked at, I think this is one of the better matte screen coatings. It is on the heavier side, so those that hate any coating grain may not be a huge fan here, but it does do a great job of eliminating reflections, reducing diffuse light, and preserving OLED blacks. And in general, these are my thoughts on matte versus glossy. If you are using this display in a brightly lit room, if there are light sources directly in front of the display, or if you can't control room lighting very well with blinds, a matte coating for an OLED is preferable, and the X27U looks great in these conditions. In a dimly lit room with some ambient light, or if you can optimize light in the room by putting light sources behind the display or using blinds, a glossy finish is preferable as it will look richer and clearer. In a dark room, like gaming with the lights off, there is almost no difference between glossy and matte, with a slight advantage to glossy as it will have no coating related grain. The WOLED panel's subpixel array is not ideal for desktop usage, and it's more noticeable on a panel of this size and resolution compared to larger OLEDs where you may view them from a bit further away. When using a 27-inch 1440p screen, I think most people will be using 100% scaling and sitting at a normal desk viewing distance, which exposes the issues with the RWBG subpixel layout that is used here in comparison to a traditional RGB layout which operating systems expect when rendering text using modern subpixel rendering techniques. WOLED uses that additional white subpixel which changes the way each color is rendered, and for fine elements like text that causes a bit of blurriness and almost shadowing relative to a normal RGB subpixel LCD. I don't think it looks very good, and it's a noticeable downgrade over an LCD for text quality. As a result, I don't think this monitor is well suited to desktop use or productivity work, and that's exacerbated by the risk of permanent burn-in when using an OLED for desktop use, which often has a lot of static elements. You shouldn't be concerned about burn-in or the subpixel layout for that matter when using OLED for content consumption, like watching videos or playing games. But if you have the same elements on screen for a long period of time, like say the toolbar in an application, that will likely burn in over time, which is why I don't recommend OLED as a productivity monitor. Unfortunately, Acer do not offer burn-in protection as part of their warranty support, so there's no peace of mind to help mitigate any concerns over burn-in. The Acer store do list a 3-year general warranty, at least here in Australia, but Acer confirmed to us this does not include burn-in. At this point, Corsair offered the best warranty across the 4 models I've tested so far, covering burn-in for 3 years. Motion performance, it's exactly the same from the X27U as other OLED monitors, so if you've seen my other reviews, this section will not be overly interesting. At 240Hz, this is an extremely fast monitor with an average response time of 0.28 milliseconds, no appreciable overshoot, and excellent cumulative deviation. The only notable difference is compared to the LG model, which had a more pronounced period of overshoot that lasts for 1 refresh cycle. The other models perform essentially identically. We also get excellent numbers across the refresh rate range, as OLED panels do not change in performance at low refresh rates, unlike LCDs. So for variable refresh rate gamers, this is an excellent choice, as you'll get superb performance even at moderate refresh rates like 120Hz. We also don't see any overshoot artifacts at 60Hz, which was a minor issue on the LG equivalent. Compared to other monitors, there really isn't anything separating the X27U from the other OLEDs, as I said. Most are around a 0.3 millisecond average response at 240Hz. This is also true for QD OLEDs, so don't expect any difference there versus WOLED. The biggest difference is to LCDs, and boy, that is a large difference. The PG27AQN is one of the fastest LCDs around, and even then, OLED response times are significantly better. This typically gives OLED an advantage over LCD at the same refresh rate, allowing for similar motion performance to an LCD at a lower refresh. I think 240Hz OLED and 360Hz LCD is pretty similar visually, with the 360Hz LCD only slightly better. Similar story in other performance charts. OLEDs have great performance across the refresh rate range, as OLEDs can maintain the same level of speed at any refresh rate. In contrast, LCDs typically get slower as the refresh rate decreases or produce more overshoot. So when we look at average cumulative deviation, OLEDs hold a significant lead over LCDs on average, and like the other graphs, the Acer monitor is no different to other OLEDs. The X27U is a great monitor for 120Hz gaming, even though it's a 240Hz monitor. So if you want to pair this with, say, a game console and play at 1440p 120Hz, that's a very suitable choice. 60Hz performance is also excellent, although of course due to the sample and hold nature of OLEDs, there will still be some level of blur here that you won't get at higher refresh rates. It was good to validate that the Acer model has excellent input latency with processing delay of just 0.1 milliseconds. However, this is in line with the other variants, so there's no real difference between any of the 4 choices. All offer an extremely fast experience, a very low processing delay, a high refresh rate, and fast response times. This makes any of these 1440p 240Hz OLEDs an excellent choice for competitive multiplayer gaming or any other fast-paced games. Like other OLED monitors on the market, this Acer variant does not support backlight strobing / black frame insertion. While it looks great at 240Hz and does have a clarity advantage over a non-strobed LCD at the same refresh rate, the best clarity is still only achievable on LCDs with strobing. The PG27AQN and XL2566K are some examples of high-end monitors with excellent motion clarity through strobing, which beats the X27U and offers a higher refresh rate. Until OLED supports strobing, this will continue to be the case, although strobing is not very compatible with variable refresh rates, so these results are only possible at fixed refreshes, which isn't going to be how everyone's going to play games. Power consumption from this Acer OLED is the lowest I've recorded at just 36 watts, displaying a full white image. This is slightly lower than the Corsair model at 40 watts, and quite a bit below the LG and Asus models, which push power above 50 watts. Brightness in this test was similar to the Corsair unit, neither reached 200 nits, so this suggests the Acer model is slightly more efficient. Color performance is next up, and we already know what this panel brings from a color space standpoint, as it's the same panel as other models. So getting 97% DCI-P3 coverage isn't a huge surprise and is in line with our results from the other variants. This led to 73% coverage of Rec 2020, which is right on the expected amount for a WOLED panel and just fine for HDR content. Factory calibration on the X27U was average, though typical of a gaming monitor. Like Corsair, Acer have opted to target around a 6500K color temperature out of the box, which is much more accurate and usable than the LG and Asus variants. This leads to reasonable grayscale delta E's, though gamma could be improved. As for saturation and color checker performance, we get the usual issue with the wide gamut monitor where there is no sRGB clamp by default, so SDR content is expanded and oversaturated a bit. Compared to other monitors, the X27U's factory grayscale calibration is average, though substantially better than the LG and Asus models. For color checker, there is not a lot separating the 4W OLEDs, although the X27U overall is mid-table, again with an average sort of result. What was disappointing to discover is that the X27U's OSD controls are a lot less flexible than the other three variants. Acer do provide an sRGB mode and the ability to switch color spaces, but this locks out other important controls like white balance. The Corsair and Asus models have an sRGB configuration without locking controls, and the LG model does lock some features, but also provides hardware calibration support. Ultimately, this makes the Acer model the least flexible and hardest to calibrate. The included sRGB mode is reasonable, though not as good as the Corsair variant in grayscale. For color checker, the sRGB mode is the best of the four variants, slightly edging out the Corsair and offering a good improvement over the other models. This mitigates the inflexibility over color control somewhat, though I still don't think it's a great solution. Really, those other settings should be unlocked. As for a full calibration via CalMan, we get pretty typical results here relative to other OLED monitors, which tend to be a bit harder to calibrate relative to LCDs due to their dynamic performance. sRGB and P3 performance ends up pretty good for applications that support ICC profiles, though for various other reasons like text clarity, I still wouldn't recommend an OLED for color critical work. One of the main differences we see between OLED models is maximum brightness in the SDR mode, and that continues to be the case with the Acer model. This is a major weakness of this monitor, only able to offer 136 nits of full screen white brightness, slightly higher than the Corsair variant, but substantially below the LG and especially Asus models, as well as QD-OLED screens. This makes it hard to recommend the Acer for SDR content. To make matters worse, the Acer model is the only one of the 4W OLEDs to ship without a uniform brightness setting or any way to disable the automatic brightness limiter. This means as you move windows around on the desktop and resize things or switch between brighter and darker applications, the overall brightness of the screen will change, and there's no way to disable this from happening. It's honestly very irritating for desktop use as the brightness change is pretty substantial, anywhere from 136 nits for full screen white to over 300 nits for smaller white windows, with the majority of the screen being dark. Having the ability to switch off the ABL, even if this means limiting the screen to a low brightness level, is a much more preferable way to use the screen for desktop app usage. Minimum brightness is excellent at just 10 nits, so this is a highly usable display for dark rooms where you really don't want an eye-scorching image. However, again, this is just for a full white image, so content with a lower average picture level will see a higher minimum brightness. And of course, as expected, we are getting a black level of 0, as the OLED panel can fully switch off to display black, giving us an effectively infinite contrast ratio. Viewing angles are excellent on this OLED, as we've come to expect from this technology. You can basically view this display from any angle and get a great experience, plus it's a flat panel, so there's no issues arising from the curve. Uniformity though was a bit less impressive. While an OLED cannot suffer from backlight bleed or IPS glow, my unit did have a bit of a dirty screen effect when viewing grey content. This is where you can see some grey uniformity issues viewing mid-dark tones relative to an LCD that shows these tones in a more consistent fashion. While white uniformity overall was very good, the X27U isn't that good for apps that have dark grey backgrounds, which is surprisingly quite a few of them. The other variants also had this issue, so it seems this WOLED panel fundamentally suffers from this due to its hardware. This Acer monitor is a great HDR display. This is due to OLED technology's inherent hardware qualities that are tailor-made for displaying HDR content. The key feature here is that each individual pixel is self-lit, meaning at a pixel level, the display can turn on or off to accurately display everything from dark shadows to bright highlights. When the display needs to show pure black, it can fully switch off, giving us the trademark rich zero-level blacks and deep shadows that OLED is known for. This is in contrast to most HDR-capable LCD panels, which are not fully controllable at the pixel level. LCDs require a backlight, and for HDR displays, this typically means the use of full-array local dimming, a technology that splits the backlight into zones. Whereas OLED can turn off each pixel individually, LCDs with local dimming can only turn off certain zones encompassing hundreds or even thousands of pixels. This can still be effective for HDR content and look great, but it has some fundamental flaws in difficult circumstances. For example, when showing a bright and dark element close together, an OLED can control each pixel as needed with a clean, accurate distinction between bright and dark. LCDs with local dimming need to masterfully control the zones to achieve the necessary distinction between bright and dark, and when the element is too small or not in the optimal position, the bright element can spill into the dark area within the backlight zone, creating ugly blooming artifacts. OLED therefore has the edge when it comes to displaying clean HDR content with minimal blooming or haloing. In some scenes, this will be the difference between raised blacks and deep blacks, such as for star fields and Christmas lights. At other times, OLED can have a brightness advantage for small bright objects within a dark scene. Subtitles will look cleaner on an OLED with reduced blooming, and generally OLEDs produce richer shadows thanks to its inherently higher contrast ratio. Aside from contrast and shadow detail, OLEDs also have other advantages for HDR. As there are no backlight zones, OLEDs are faster to transition between bright and dark with no visible zone transitions. OLEDs are much less likely to suffer from backlight flickering, although light PWM behavior, especially when using a variable refresh rate, is common, though not particularly noticeable. And OLEDs like this one do not increase input latency in its HDR mode, as they don't need to run a backlight zone algorithm. The downside to HDR on an OLED is brightness. OLEDs typically don't get as bright as an LCD with full array local dimming in HDR content, especially for large window sizes. And we see that's the case for the X27U, with a full screen white image in the HDR mode delivering 138 nits, the same as the SDR mode. This is in the ballpark of other WOLED panels with the exception of the PG27AQDM, but it's still not a great result overall compared to QD-OLEDs and even LCDs that we've tested. 10% window brightness was okay at 633 nits, but this was the weakest result of the 4 WOLED 27-inch monitors we've tested. The brightest is the Asus model at around 900 nits, so this is a massive discrepancy that gives the Asus variant a huge advantage. However, the Acer model is relatively similar to the Corsair and LG variants, though a little dimmer. It is brighter than QD-OLED monitors as well in this specific test. Looking at brightness versus window size, the Acer and Corsair models perform in the same manner, with the Acer model slightly less bright than the Corsair in my testing. The LG model is also similar but offers less brightness for the very smallest elements. Then there's the Asus model, which is clearly the best, with by far the brightest experience at window sizes at and below 25%. This carries across to most of the real scene benchmarks. The X27U is mid-table for video scene 1, while for video scene 2 it offers similar brightness to the other WOLEDs except for the Asus model, of course. For gaming performance, I saw 591 nits in our test area with an absolute maximum recorded of around 670 nits, which is still well below the pack leader in the Asus PT27AQDM. HDR accuracy is not great, with the upper part of the EOTF curve being boosted in brightness relative to what is accurate. The lower parts are very solid, so dark and mid-tone performance is great, and there's no issues with shadow detail, but it seems that Acer are trying to artificially boost apparent HDR brightness here, and there are no HDR settings to adjust this. HDR color performance is mediocre, affected by that boosting of brightness in the upper EOTF range. I also wasn't happy with the way the Acer model handles the switch between the HDR and SDR modes. When you first enable HDR, you have to go into the OSD and set HDR to auto under the picture settings. This delivers a proper HDR experience. But this setting is also poorly named, as it's less of an auto and more of an on switch. As soon as you switch back to SDR, the HDR mode is still enabled in the OSD, and then you have to go in and manually turn it off to get an accurate SDR experience. Very annoying. The monitor should definitely be switching off its HDR mode when an HDR signal is detected automatically. You really don't want to be messing around with the OSD settings every time. Final section of this review is the Hub Essentials checklist, which looks to see if Acer are accurately advertising this monitor and meeting basic minimum performance standards. In the first section, the main deduction is for using HDMI 2.0 instead of 2.1, and I also spotted one marketing image that has the incorrect bezel size for this monitor, although most other images appear accurate. I gave Acer borderline results for brightness and color space, which are close to what is advertised. It's good to see that Acer advertised factory calibration and delivered that in their sRGB mode, although there are other limitations. For motion performance, Acer advertised a 0.01 millisecond response time, clarified to 0.03 milliseconds gray to gray in their spec sheet. This is still a bit optimistic for panel performance and doesn't really present the true difference to 1 millisecond class LCDs. As for HDR performance, this is absolutely a true HDR product, though claims of 1000 nits of brightness are exaggerated. Like a lot of other WOLED monitors, I was unable to hit this figure under realistic test conditions. In the final section, I awarded some deductions for the non-RGB subpixel array, risk of permanent burn-in, the automatic brightness limiter that can't be disabled, and the issue switching between HDR and SDR modes. Luckily, firmware updates are supported, so theoretically Acer could address this in the future. At this point, I've tested 4 27-inch 1440p 240Hz OLED gaming monitors using the same LG OLED panel, and unfortunately out of these models I would place the Acer Predator X27U in 4th place. It sounds harsh to me to call this the worst of the bunch, given in many respects it's still a decent high-end gaming monitor, but there's just a few little things that Acer hasn't done as well as its competitors, and ultimately that makes it difficult to recommend. I'll start with the good stuff though, and that's the inherent qualities to this OLED panel. It's extremely fast, with a high 240Hz refresh rate and elite response time speed, delivering excellent motion clarity. When combined with its great HDR capabilities, we end up with a monitor that's well suited to multiple types of gaming. Whether you're playing fast-paced multiplayer titles or visually stunning single-player games, this sort of OLED panel delivers a great experience that can't be matched in versatility by other monitor types at the moment. And just on HDR, we do get a true HDR experience here with a nice wide color gamut, excellent contrast capabilities thanks to per pixel local dimming, and zero level blacks, plus sufficient levels of brightness without being especially amazing. The X27U offers a noticeable and significant step up over an SDR setup, and I think a lot of buyers will be happy with what this offers for HDR gaming and video playback. Where Acer have stumbled with the X27U is that they aren't offering a point of difference in comparison to the other models I've tested. There's no killer standout feature here. The Asus model, for example, is much brighter in both the SDR and HDR modes. The LG model is also brighter in the SDR mode and offers hardware calibration support. The Corsair model isn't amazing, but does provide the best factory calibration, especially in the sRGB mode. I can't really point to any aspect of the Acer model and say that it does something better than its competitors. At the same time, there are some clear areas where the X27U is worse than the others. The inability to disable the automatic brightness limiter makes this the least suitable 27-inch WOLED I've tested for desktop app usage. The sRGB mode is locked down, preventing further hardware calibration. Switching between the HDR and SDR modes is annoying and requires OSD setting changes every time, and overall brightness is the weakest of the 4 options tested, with no burn-in coverage specified in the warranty. The good news is most of these problems could theoretically be resolved through a firmware update. Add in a uniform brightness mode, unlock the sRGB mode, fix HDR/SDR switching, tune up the HDR mode's accuracy a bit more, maybe bump up brightness slightly, and we'll be left with a very good product. But there's no guarantee these issues will be fixed, and really some of them shouldn't have made it into the shipping firmware. Another drawback to the X27U is the price. While not yet available in the US, when Acer originally announced it, they set the price at $1,100 US. Given the other 3 variants have a $1,000 MSRP, and the Acer model is the least compelling, if Acer does go with $1,100 at launch, it will be dead on arrival. LG and Corsair have already begun discounting their models during the occasional sale. There's just no way the Acer variant is worth $100 to $200 more. At MSRP pricing, I'll continue to recommend the Asus PG27AQDM, which is the best of the bunch. In Australia, Acer have put up the monitor for 1900 Aussie dollars, which is also not especially well priced. The 27GR95QE from LG has an $1,800 MSRP and was very recently discounted to just $1,600. The Corsair model is priced at $1,750, while the Asus model is notably more expensive at $2,000. Acer just haven't made a compelling offering here. I'd be choosing between the LG and Asus models at current prices depending on your budget, only grabbing the X27U if it was discounted by several $100s. But hey, it's great to have a range of different options. Competition ends up being great for consumers, and I'd expect quite a pricing battle throughout the rest of 2023. Anyway, that's it for this review of the Acer Predator X27U. If you do appreciate our coverage of these monitors and you like the fact that we have now tested 4 very similar OLED monitors, which as far as on the testing side of things isn't super exciting, but it does give you guys, the viewers, all the information you now need to go buy one of these monitors. You know which one's the best, go buy the best one. That's really what we do here at Monitors Unboxed. So if you do appreciate that work, then the easiest thing you can do is subscribe to the channel, give the video a like. And if you do want to support our testing directly, you know, we do have our Patreon and Float Plan accounts, links to those in the description below, and you get a few other nice little bonuses like our Discord community, which is where a lot of you like to chat about monitors and you let me know about some of the things that we've recently been testing on this very channel. So thanks to everyone for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.